Subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to get all the latest updates.
Union budget is historic in many different ways. It's the first budget that is after the pandemic. It is a budget that the finance minister said was undertaken in circumstances like never before. It was also a digital budget. Nirmala Sitharaman stood out there for her red tablet, getting rid of the big potha of documents that are normally accompanying finance ministers into parliament. But the big question will be whether, as this digital budget is actually placed on the floor of parliament, is it a budget that can be a magic pill for the economy? Now, I want to bring in our guests at this point, whom I'd like to introduce one by one so we can actually come out of these graphics. But remember, this is only the third time, as she pointed out, on the floor of the House that our budget has in fact followed a period of contraction. Now, let me just introduce all our guests one by one. We're joined by Madhavan Narayanan. Madhavan Narayanan is one of our senior most journalists, has been a business commentator among the many different spaces of expertise that he actually does enjoy. We have Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who's of course an economist. Welcome to the program, sir. We have with us Amit Basole, an economist with the Azim Premji University. We have Amitabh Behar, who's the CEO of Oxfam India. That Oxfam inequality report really being quoted today as people asking whether a chance for a wealth tax in a COVID year was in fact missed. We're also joined on the program by Professor Bharat Ramaswami, who is with the Ashoka University, and I'm seeing Professor Aman Agarwal join us as well. So we've got a full house. Welcome, everybody. And let's get started. We have lots of different questions here at the moment. And I want to start with you, if I may, Madhavan, to give us the big picture.
Yeah, this is what I call a no-brainer budget, Barkha, because I would call it the urge to splurge budget, because the government had everything to gain and nothing to lose from spending more, because the whole world is reeling under the shock of the pandemic, COVID-19, and the UK is not even got out of its lockdown blues yet. The US is talking about a big stimulus. So there's no time than this to tell all the deficit watchers, look who's talking. So this is one moment where the sun, the moon, and the stars have lined up, which means the IMF, the Wall Street, and the leftists at JNU are all saying the same thing.
Which is what? Spend more, spend more.
Especially on health.
What did you say? The leftists, the rightists? What, just describe that again?
The sun, the moon, and the stars, meaning the Wall Street, IMF, and JNU. This is a rare moment in history that the three agree to converge on everything. And and therefore, it's a no-brainer budget. Means nobody's going to complain if you spend more, especially on health. And infrastructure was always on the table. And therefore, this is a big spending budget. And can you imagine the government not flinching while announcing a fiscal deficit of 9.5%? This is like saying, I'm going for growth and healthcare. And there are tea leaves to be read. There are nuances such as my friend Pankaj Pichori just pointed out. For instance, the fertilizer subsidy has been contained. Some of the subsidies that would historically you will see as pro-poor are sort of down, except for food subsidy, which was ramped up during the pandemic. So therefore, there's a lot to be read between the lines. But having said that...
In fact, Madhavan, we've had people on the platform who've been saying that the government could have spent more, that this fiscal deficit could have traveled further, that it hasn't actually addressed consumption sentiment, that we could have gone ahead of 9.5%.
Listen, please notice Mr. Narendra Modi had hedged his bets by already talking about a series of mini budgets if required. And we have to consider the fact that the pandemic is far from over. Even if the best case scenarios play out on the vaccine, we will still have 8 months to go before the government can really afford to spend and the private sector can crowd in. So I think the government wants to keep some of the ammunition on its own side. So in the best case scenario for Nirmala Sitharaman, she could have the cake and eat it too, which basically means she could say, look, I've even managed the fiscal deficit while reviving growth. And having said that, let me also watch out. I would be keenly watching the statement from Reserve Bank Governor Shaktikanta Das.
Yeah.
Because on such occasions, the Reserve Bank or the central banks worldwide usually sound a note of caution on inflation, fueled by the anticipated demand. Now, my guess is that Dr. Das, being a former bureaucrat and a favorite one at that, would probably soften the language, but he cannot soften the anticipated data. So good economists watch data, and whereas there's always room for interpretation and waiting, and that will happen. So given all that, I think it would have been foolish for Nirmala Sitharaman to have a higher deficit announcement than what she's already done. Well, in reality, it might turn out to be actually even more higher. So it has now become clear that the budget is no longer the old-fashioned British colonial exercise in which you announce everything on one day and wait for the year to end. There are some series of strokes to be played in the middle.
In general, you think pretty smart budget?
Pretty smart, and it's a no-brainer budget in which I'm saying that, look, some of the things Dr. Manmohan Singh wrote in the Hindu 2 days ago on the economic survey, such as spending on health and infrastructure, is very, it's there. The only thing that's missing is surprise. There's no significant increase in defense budget in spite of the standoff with China. So that is something I would be watching, which is a grand concession to welfareism by what might be called a right-wing government.
Okay. That's interesting, and let me just bring in Professor Santosh Mehrotra right away. Professor Mehrotra, your first thoughts. Madhavan says it's a no-brainer budget. Everybody from the left to the right agrees for once that the government needed to spend more, and that's what the government has done.
No, I'm sorry to say that the expenditure level in FY22 is going to be at exactly the same level as it was in FY21, and in FY21. It was well below par. I just want to begin by pointing out that the fiscal stimulus was in FY21 was barely 2.2% of GDP. And by comparison, the emerging market economies put in place a fiscal stimulus of 4.2% of GDP. I'm not even comparing ourselves to the rich countries. By comparison with the EMEs, we put in place a fiscal stimulus of merely 2.2% of GDP. And if you look at the numbers, as I have while I was sort of coming back home, I noticed that we spent 34.4 lakh crores, and we are going to do the same this year. The gross borrowing was 12 lakh crores in FY21, and gross borrowing is 12 lakh crores this year. So, and all that is happening. The fiscal deficit is falling only because we are expecting a growth of 10 to 11%. So I'm honestly disappointed. Of course, I'm happy to note that health expenditure has happened. If it hadn't happened this year, when would it have happened? I'm happy to note that capex has increased, but there's no increase in education expenditure. In fact, there's a real terms decline, and there's a real terms decline practically in agriculture. So I'm honestly, I'm appalled. Obviously, I expected that no changes will happen in taxes, but indirect taxes are already accounting for a higher share of total tax revenue, and our tax revenue to GDP ratio has been systematically stagnant, and it has fallen this year. So honestly, the government should have borrowed more. It should have done the divestment when Sensex is booming, and it hasn't done so. You know how much we raked in on divestment this time? 15,000 crores when the target was 2.15 lakh crores. Let me stop there for the moment.
Okay, let me just get Madhavan to quickly respond, because Madhavan, there goes your theory on the left to the right, everybody being in agreement. You saw Santosh very passionately say that actually this is just not enough.
Yeah, I think Dr. Mehrotra does make a valid point from what might be called the orthodoxy of the public expenditure school, which basically means the government ought to do the spending on its own. Whereas if you look at the details of the budget, there's plenty of scope, such as the recapitalization of banks by 20,000 crore, the plan to set up a new development finance institution with a special new capital of 20,000 crore, plus allowing infrastructure companies of approved infrastructure projects to set up, issue zero coupon bonds, and relaxing terms for the foreign institutional investors for debt, which basically means there is a big spending going on. It need not necessarily come straight out of the government's budget, much as I understand Dr. Mehrotra's perspective, particularly with regard to agriculture, the big surprise is not only on the side of defense, it's also on the side of agriculture. Fertilizer subsidy, for instance, hasn't gone up much. Food subsidy is understandable because already a lot of amount has been spent, and there's been a virtual doubling compared to last year's budget estimate. The next year's would be nearly double or more than double, perhaps. But having said that, the orthodox spending by the government, but this is the BJP government, let's face it. I did not expect anything else from the BJP. Their whole strategy is to essentially build on aspirational infrastructure with as much, as Nirmala Sitharaman herself began by saying, one of the 6 points she has is maximum government, minimum government. Japanese, the Arabs and the Singaporeans will come and invest to make up for what the government used to spend in the good old days.
So lots of different points there. We also saw a very, very robust, aggressive defense of the MSP and procurement regime, against the backdrop of the continuing farm protests, and we'll play out that statement from the FM for all of you. But the big picture, right? The big picture, as the government reiterated in Parliament, that it's committed to the welfare of farmers, and we can examine all of these points one by one. Bharat Ramaswamy, for you, what was your big takeaway?
Well, I think it all matters on what your expectations from this budget were.
Yeah.
So and so I think in one respect I do share the relief of Madhavan that the government did not try to clamp down on expenditures. Yeah. On the other hand, as we have seen, even during COVID time, the government never believed in measures to boost demand. There was no move to expand the safety net and so on. And so those measures were not on the anvil this time around as well. I thought that, given in my expectations, I thought actually, when I've seen the speeches of the finance ministers of the last 6 years when the BJP has been in power, I thought this was actually probably the best speech. The government could not have done very much because they were out of money. There is a contraction in the economy, but at least Nirmala Sitharaman took the opportunity to signal some sort of an economic policy in terms of the 6 pillars, all of which are laudable goals. As I see it, is that 2 of those pillars in terms of health and infrastructure were somewhat spelled out in detail. The others are very sketchy, and we didn't get very far with respect to either inclusive development or in terms of minimum government, maximum governance, and so on. I think that from my point of view, I can see that, if you set the bar low, it's that there is, I don't see any damage to the economy in terms of the status quo. I think the opportunity that what I would have liked to see is that a greater attention. I welcome the attention on health and infrastructure, but I would have liked to see something more on safety nets and how to boost the purchasing power at the bottom end of the population, because we are facing a demand contraction, and it's only at the bottom end people will spend. People like you and me will...
Let me try and sum this up. Status quoist, safe, generally welcome direction of the budget from your point of view?
Status quo is, yes, in terms of, if this is what Atmanirbharta means, these 6 pillars,
yeah,
I am relieved. I think in terms of protectionism, it's only been some tinkering of import duties at the margin. Nothing major has happened. So I think there is no major snapping of links with the world. Of course, there are contradictions in the notion of Atmanirbharta that we want to give these production-linked incentives, and there is some protectionism which is inbuilt in that notion, and so on and so forth. But that aside, I think that's it's a kind of a.
So we've gone the range. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I want to go to the others also. We've gone the range from Madhavan saying no-brainer, Professor Mehrotra saying disappointed and appalling, to Bharat saying generally right direction. Quick opening comments from both Amit and Aman, because then I want to come to Amitabh on what many say could have happened and didn't, which was a wealth tax for the billionaires. But to you, Amit, first. Amit.
Yeah, thanks. So on the whole, I am also disappointed and concerned that there wasn't really an adequate, sentiment expressed, I guess, for the hardship and the welfare losses that we have suffered in the last year. And I would have expected a lot more, not only rhetorically as well, actually, in the budget speech, acknowledging the suffering that has gone on, as well as substantively in terms of outlay, something much more, I would say. So just to give you a few examples to start off with, maybe we can return to this later. The Narega budget, is an increase over last year's budgeted estimate, but it's a reduction over what was actually spent. 1 lakh crore is the current year. It's gone down to 73,000 crores. NSAP, the social assistance program, the pension similarly went up, gone down to where it was. PDS looks big, as was mentioned earlier, but that's mostly because the FCI, subsidy has been brought into the books, which has been widely sort of lauded, that the government has come clean on those numbers and actually given the fiscal deficit numbers for what they are, which is fine, but that's not really a real increase, going forward. So in most of these crucial things like Narega, ration, pension, and so forth, which have been the lifeline for not just the poor, but several of the bottom deciles. And there's a big hole in their budgets. Remember, our calculations show that the bottom decile has lost 3 months of income last year, and that can have long-term consequences. So there had to have been some compensation, which I'm really disappointed to see that there is none.
Okay, Aman, do you want to add to that? Aman.
Yes, you see, when we look at the budget, what were we really expecting? We have all had a dip around the world, including India. And we know at the verge of this stage, the first and most important requirement for the country like India is to bring back the confidence in the people that they can go to work tomorrow safe and sound and be there for the families going ahead. Be there for the families going ahead. And that is something which was the cause of concern. And this is what I've been voicing for the last 1 week, that there would be an extensive focus on social welfare, healthcare, and the well-being of the people at large. And this is something which came as a very clear reflection of what was being announced immediately in the first stage itself by Madam Nirmala Sitharaman ji on the budget. I think there is a focus, and I think she's made it very categorically clear that the vaccination, 35,000 crores, plus in addition to that, if anything is required, she would be chipping in terms of trying to get that up. I think that is something which was needed at this hour, because if people have still the fear psychosis, and especially more in a community which cannot really afford the medication or go about doing it, because almost every family has had someone, kith or kin, been a victim of COVID in the last 1.5 years. I've had 2 distant, close family members who have died because of COVID. So there are those fear factors, and unless that is removed, we will not see any kind of a growth coming as forward. Secondly, being worked at the World Bank 20 years back in Washington, D.C., I know that the numbers crunched by these institutions, both the IMF and the World Bank, are not poured in effect of any politician or any government per se just trying to influence because they are shareholders in that organization. India and China both are shareholders in the World Bank and the IMF, but it's not because they are shareholders that they will influence the figures. And the fact that the IMF at this juncture has come out with a figure of 11% growth, which is fairly astounding compared to what the rest of the world is facing. And the fact that we have had a negative dip of less than what was being projected clearly shows that there have been rebounding factors. We had an international conference last 3 days, and one of the association members on shipping industry said that the shipping industry in the last 10 years, the kind of profitability they have not had is what they have earned in 2020. And then even in transportation, he was, and he's also the president of the Transportation Association. He was the president of Bharat. So there is what I'm trying to say is that there is that positive factor, and even the automobile industry is showing those numbers. The GST collections are showing. Where is the revenue coming from? So that's where they're taxing. So in my opinion, the hopes from the budget in terms of real allocations, when they've already reduced the taxation, whether it's a corporate level or personal, we are amongst the lowest tax-based countries around the world. From when we started our journey with 98% taxation to today, we are around 5, 20 and 30% taxation, with certainly an effect of GST and others, which is indirect taxation, which comes in. But I think from that perspective, what allocations she's tried to make, and even the allocation in terms of taking the projects forward, is important.
Okay, I need to now actually do this a little bit in terms of breaking down specifics, but I do want to start with Amitabh on this. And the specific that I want to start with is many people believe that this could have been a year for a COVID tax, right? That did not happen. And we've been quoting extensively from your Oxfam inequality report. And I want to just bring up some of those. Can we just bring up those figures before we go to Amitabh? If we can just show what the Oxfam inequality report said, can we bring up those graphics? It spoke about the staggering increase in wealth of India's billionaires, and many are asking why at this time there could not have been a COVID cess, at least for billionaires like the Ambani and Danis. When we look at some of the other staggering figures, which basically point to 170,000 people losing their job every hour in April, as per their Oxfam inequality report. And that's, of course, contrasted at the other end with the fact that almost all households went down in income, and you actually had a Mukesh Ambani. We can switch to those numbers in just a moment from now, increasing his own wealth by 75%. Amitabh, do you want to come in there? Were you disappointed that there was no COVID cess?
Absolutely, Barkha. Deeply disappointed. As in, the question was asked that ultimately, for whom is the budget made? At least this tragic year, we should have seen the migrant worker, the frontline health worker, and the millions and millions of informal sector workers who lost their jobs at the center of this budget. And if you really look at that, I think it's a hugely disappointing budget, and disappointing at multiple levels, it's been said. But let me just, flag out 2 or 3 of those. One, the whole idea of redistribution is something which anyways our report is highlighting the need for redistribution, but that's been completely missed. The possibility of a wealth tax, some kind of a cess, at least in this unprecedented year, it has been completely missed out. Let me also look at broadly the social sector. As Santosh has already said, if you really look at the budget this year, it's actually just an increase of 33,000 crores. Just 33,000 crores. Look at the health budget. I would say, before I go to the health budget, look at the social sector. I think the story is extremely disappointing across the social sector. Even on the health budget, the numbers that at least I have, that it was the revised estimate for the Ministry of Health, Ayush, all those 3 clubbed together was 21,163 crores. Whereas now what we're looking at is a projection of only 10,565 crores. So even on the health, I think it's disappointing. Yes, we are looking at 35,000 crores on the vaccine, which is good. But again, our estimates tell us that we would need at least 52,000 crores if you're looking at a free vaccine for all. Just let's move to education. We've talked of education. And again, there's no real increase. And what you're really looking at is now suddenly coming up with this idea of 15,000 elite schools. What will happen to the 1.5 million schools, the digital divide that we have talked of? Look at NREGA, which really provided some kind of relief to the people in this country. And you have not seen any additional allocation for the NREGA. So it is a surprising budget. And it's certainly from the redistribution point of view, or from the point of view.
What would you have wanted to see, Amitabh, that you did not see? What would you have wanted to see?
So as I said, one, certainly in terms of some kind of a wealth tax that would have been critical. But let's just pick health. As in, we do need to look at the details, but what I'm seeing is you're talking of a PM Swasth Atmanirbhar Yojana. The details are not there, but that's looking at only 64,000 crores over the next 5 years. So what is the real allocation? As in, we are still, as we've been constantly reminding everybody, that we are fourth from the bottom in terms of investments in health globally. We are at 1.6% of the GDP. Maybe at least post-COVID, we should have had increased it significantly higher, but that seems unlikely that we are looking at. So a budget which was actually focused on the social sector was looking at something like, say, an NREGA for the urban sector. It was very evident the distress the informal sector workers, the migrant workers went through. And I think all that is a huge, huge missed opportunity. And I would really say, ultimately budgets are the real policy intent of a government. And that's where you see the policy intent, that maybe it is really about catering to the billionaires and not looking at the majority.
You're going so far as to say you think this is a budget that caters to the billionaires.
It does. To the rich, it does not address the real needs of the common and ordinary people.
All right. I want actually Madhavan and Santosh Mehrotra to have quick responses to that. Then we'll play out what Nirmala specifically said on the farm laws, Nirmala Sitharaman. Madhavan, there goes your imagined sort of unity of response to this budget, right? You just saw it.
I could not agree more with the facts presented by the panelists, including Amitabh and Dr. Mehrotra. But the key point to note is that this government has an alternative narrative on how it all works. They believe that taxing wealth amounts to taxing wealth creators, and that affects growth, that affects incomes, that affects welfare of the poor. This is a very simplistic narrative that doesn't recognize the fact that there are structural issues and inequalities in the economy. I completely agree on that. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because this is how the narrative works. Please understand that the disinvestment process has to go through. And for it to go through, the markets have to be in a good mood. For that to happen, the wealth creators should not be taxed. So there is a circular logic operating. Depending on who you are, you can imagine a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
But I agree with my old school friend Bharat that essentially nothing has been done at the bottom of the pyramid. Essentially, you're expected to clamber on your own. I'm particularly surprised by the MNREGA data because I didn't have it when I came into your show, Barkha. But I'm glad my panelists have suggested here. The fact is that you could have ignored the rest and got away with it. But how is it that this government, in the middle of a prolonged downturn or contraction in what was expected to be a high growth economy, forget this most basic of safety nets? I'll probably wait for the leading lights of the Congress party to talk on this, but it is certainly a big one.
So, Santosh Mehrotra, if you wanted to add in, and with Bharat also, who also thought like Madhavan in the beginning that the budget has generally moved in the right direction. Professor Mehrotra, first you. Professor Mehrotra, sorry, let me unmute you. I'm so sorry. Go ahead, sir. Are you able to hear me? I don't know. Maybe I think you're frozen. Sir, are you able to hear me? Okay, let me take the same question to Bharat actually. Bharat, do you want to come in there? Bharat, go ahead.
Yeah. So what I said, Barkha, was that my expectations were not very high to begin with. That over the last 1 year, we had seen that the government had not shown any intent towards addressing the demand contraction of the economy because of the disastrous, even catastrophic fall in incomes at the bottom end of the distribution. What I was worried about is that this budget is about what would be the direction of the Atmanirbharta policy, and to that extent, I'm relieved. I think the thing is that I've also welcomed the fact that the finance minister has put on record these 6 pillars in a way that has not been articulated before, that the government is committed to these things. Now, this is in this year, there is not money for many things. And so I did not expect that they will be, that the government will be able to comprehensively address all of these priorities. The thing that what I would have liked is some movement towards even a modest universal basic income to enlarge the, really the inclusiveness in that way. And that's what I would have liked to see. But it's clear that that is not on the agenda of this government.
Okay, let me just hold you there. Welcome, Sunil, Alagh, to the program. Sunil, hi, and welcome. A very interesting conversation going on in the budget. There was an assumption, large consensus that this was mostly pragmatic, but maybe not bold enough. But many people on this panel believe that this budget did not go far enough in addressing the suffering of the poor over the last year, when India's billionaires have actually manifold increased their wealth, as the Oxfam inequality report shows us. Your first thoughts, Sunil, if you can hear me. Go ahead, Sunil. Sunil, your first thoughts on the budget? And we just lost Sunil right there. Sunil, are you able to hear me? I'm not sure why Sunil. Sunil, are you able to hear me? Sunil, hi. Sunil, are you able to hear me? All right. He is not able to hear me. And I just will get Madhavan if you want to add something. And I think Professor Mehrotra is back with us. Yeah.
I think the key point in what Bharat made was that, and even Amitabh from Oxfam made, was that they were expecting what would be considered as progressive in normal times. I think the expectation was a little higher, but I want to point out something that wasn't mentioned in the context, which is that on globalization and Atmanirbhar, Nirmala Sitharaman has made some points clear that India wants to be part of a global supply chain, which should be a sigh of relief for the old
Sorry, you got muted. I don't know why. Just go ahead. Sorry, just make that point.
No, I'm just saying that Nirmala Sitharaman made it clear that India wants to be part of a global supply chain in manufacturing, which is to say that the Atmanirbhar plan, which is self-reliance, will not be of the old-fashioned protectionist variety, but one which will be calibrated with globalization, which should be some kind of a relief for the pro-globalization reformists. So they haven't rocked the boat of the Narasimha Rao equation. But at the same time, they have forgotten the old Manmohan Singh logic of reforms with a human face. And that, they do not seem to want to do anything proactively on measures such as universal basic income. They are content with what they've already done, such as the income support scheme for farmers, which itself has become contentious following the farm laws. So I think they are just betting their farm on growth, although that would be a mixed metaphor given what's happening in the farm sector.
All right. I think both Professor Santosh Mehrotra and Sunil Alagh are back with us, and I'm really hoping both of them can hear me. Sunil, I'll start with you. I'm hoping you can hear me this time. Big thoughts.
Yeah, I can.
Go ahead. First, your macro thoughts on the budget. There is some concern here that it wasn't pro-poor enough. There wasn't a growth strategy. If there was a growth strategy, there should have been a COVID cess for India's billionaires. Your big picture.
No, my big picture is that I was giving it about 8.5. It's a damn good budget. It's a very good budget, much better than what I expected. Where do I knock out 1.5 is that I was expecting the focus to be on jobs, which they've done very well because the infrastructure that they are spending on is going to create it. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind with all that expenditure, something in terms of job creation will happen. And the more money you put in hands of the poor, the more they spend. There is no question in my mind. It's the middle class that I feel has got slightly ignored, because that 1.5% I'm knocking out because there's nothing to encourage spending. I did not want them to put money in the hands of the middle class because they tend to save. The question was that in areas where you needed spending, like transport, like taking an air flight or spending on hotels, spending on restaurants, they should have incentivized them by giving them some tax relief if you spent the money. They don't seem to have done any incentivization to expenditure. And manufacturing, please, let me quickly add that, look, manufacturing depends on demand creation. If there's no demand creation, manufacturing will not go up at all. And it's important that people spend. And, October to November, December figures have gone up substantially on spending. But please remember that Amazon and Flipkart and companies like that offered 50% discount. They never used to offer that below. That is the first sign that this demand has to be sustained now. Otherwise, people were spending because of the massive discounts. Now, how do you sustain it? You had to encourage the spending. And therefore, they haven't given the middle class that amount of incentivization which I expected. And that's why I rated 8.5 out of 10.
And what are you giving the 8.5 for? What for you leaps out the most in terms of...
I'm giving it because of job creation. I'm just going. I'm giving 10 on 10 on job creation because they are spending like mad on infrastructure, which I expected them to do. I also expected them that, look, their fiscal deficit, they are not going to be bothered about, and they haven't been bothered about that. But I'm reducing 1.5 because I wanted them to give the...
Well, we just lost Sunil's connection there as he was giving an 8.5 out of 10 score, which I'm sure, Professor Mehrotra, you don't agree with. If we can have you back. Professor Mehrotra, can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, so you saw Sunil Alagh there, and he'll just reconnect. He was actually quite delighted with the budget. So we're having a range of views here, and I can see Sunil back. I'll let Sunil complete his points, and then Professor Mehrotra can respond to it. Go ahead, Sunil.
Yeah. All I was saying was that, look, it is okay to feel that demand is going up, but it's going up because of massive discounts. Hotels have reduced their rates. Everybody has reduced. So if you want them to get back to normalcy soon as possible, you have to incentivize people to spend, and there is no incentivization. In fact, inflation for them is their petrol prices have gone up, their food prices have gone up, everything has gone up there. And if you don't incentivize them, they are going to save.
Okay, so very differing sets of views on this panel, and I just want Santosh to respond. But briefly, Sunil, we were debating before you joined us a wealth tax for India's billionaires. Is that something that could have happened and did not?
No, look, we are charging 43% tax without any social benefits to the top lot. So if you're going to add to their taxes, it doesn't make any sense because you would have just about recovered very little. The question is, unless you can even go up to 50% if you like, and I don't have to save for my future. I don't mind paying 50%. In America or anywhere else, the taxes have come down and they have that their social protection is there, that when they retire, they don't have to spend on health, they don't have to spend on hospitals, they get everything. So here we don't have that. So how much are you going to clobber the rich, and what are you going to gain on wealth tax?
Why do you feel the rich are being clobbered? Why do you feel the rich are being clobbered?
I would say clobbered because at some point of time, this small amount, you would clobber the whole industry because the entire perception would have gone wrong. How much are you going to collect on this very minor amount? But you're going to say that, look, unless you're making a political budget, in which case you want to say like social and all that stuff, you can say I'm going to hit the rich. But otherwise, this is a very good budget because it's not a capitalist budget. They're looking after the poor. And at the same time, they're encouraging people who have the capacity to set up manufacturing, to import less, to export more, to set up factories, to go in for capex. And if you keep hitting the people who are going to provide all that, that doesn't make any sense to me unless you're getting massive gains. What is the amount that you would get on wealth tax? Nothing.
Okay, I'm seeing Madhavan and Amitabh wanting to respond. So brief interjections and then Professor Santosh Mehrotra. Madhavan, go ahead. Yeah.
Very simply, we have a confused debate in India where we don't seem to distinguish between high incomes, wealth, and inheritance. These are three different things on which India should begin thinking as a country. Because Sunil Alagh's points of view are well taken. If you look at the rich as wealth creators who have to save for their own retirement, what about inheritors who, without moving a finger, inherit billions and millions? So we haven't even brought inheritance tax on the table here and for discussion in India. And then wealth creators need not be wealth accumulators. So there are numbers to be put into these qualitative thoughts going forward.
Okay, Amitabh, do you want to add?
Just to say, what Sunil is saying, as we did our study, and just to give you some small figures, just 1% tax on the wealth on the top 11 billionaires would have taken care of 9 lakh ASHA workers for 5 years. So that's the volume that we would have got even with just 1% tax.
1%
so
tax on 1%. Say that again. 1% tax
on the wealth that 11 top billionaires added during the pandemic. So that's what we're looking at. So to say that this is clobbering the super rich who are actually in their super yachts, I think that's a problematic framing. It is really about when you're looking at 25% people living with 3,000 rupees a month, then you're talking of some kind of, sanity coming back to this society.
Yeah, I just want Sunil, I know we'll respond to everybody, but Professor Mehrotra has been waiting a while. Professor Mehrotra, go ahead. You've heard a whole bunch of views. Let's bring you in now.
Thank you so much, Barkha. I am very sympathetic to what Madhavan has been saying, that we haven't really begun to think seriously about a wealth and inheritance tax. And honestly, if we don't create a narrative and a dialogue about this, people like us, then this government or any government will not think about it. Because it's not that on Times Now, where I'm coming from, I didn't make that argument. But of course, you instantaneously on that kind of channel get shot down by saying, oh, wealth creators, wealth creators. The point is that what this government does not understand, because it doesn't have sufficiently weighty economists in their midst in the first place, is that in 3 decades, our tax to GDP ratio has stagnated. And yet at the same time, per capita incomes have quadrupled in the 30 years since economic reforms began. And we need to remind ourselves of how the rich countries became rich. The rich countries became rich, that as their per capita income rose, they taxed more. The tax to GDP ratio rose between 1880 and 1980 from under 11% of GDP to over 40% of GDP, and the size of the state grew. Unfortunately, what the data is showing is that we are, and I say this for the previous government as well as this government, I mean, this government least of all things like this. So we need to change this narrative. This is my point one. Honestly, my next point is the following, that this government goes on talking about V-shaped recovery. All we've seen is a rebound. We've not seen a recovery, and such recovery as we've had is already K-shaped. And going forward, it is going to remain K-shaped, because we know perfectly well that we are going to add about 85 million poor people by $1 a day in just 2020 and more next year. So what is the meaning of this? The meaning of what Behar's report pointed out was that we are going to see a K-shaped. I can give you 3 or 4 other ways in which this is going to be a K-shaped recovery. And therefore, we have to come to some sort of consensus about a basic income. And if we were to generate growth, we will not be able to sustain growth after 3 or 4 years, because we now know perfectly well that so much capacity would have been destroyed over the next 2 or 3 years. MSMEs are closing, left, right, and center. The unorganized sector has not recovered, unlike what the V-shaped recovery walas will try and tell you. So where is the demand going to come from? Because the jobs are not growing. Their joblessness has increased. The wage rates have fallen. If anything, what we know about hunger and malnutrition that is increasing, how are we going to sustain growth? For the very reasons that we want to reach $10 trillion by 2030, you can see how very cleverly this government has dropped $5 trillion by 2025. They've just dropped it. Bhool gaye. Amnesia ho gaya. You're not even going to sustain growth to get to your fanciful idea of a $10 trillion economy if you're not inclusive.
Before I get Sunil to respond to that, what's the one thing you think the FM could have done in terms of a policy?
Cash transfer. Cash transfer. 6 months ago, I wrote a long paper, gave it to Rajiv Kumar. It's not that they didn't consider it. When Atmanirbhar Bharat was being considered, they thought about this. And as Amit will tell you, we've been consistently arguing for an urban employment guarantee. These are two things if they had done. And by the way, Madhavan, I don't think we need a UBI. What all we need is to provide 500 rupees a month, which is what PM Kisan gives for at least for several months for 50% of those who are poor. And we can identify them. The identification was worked out by me in detail in this paper for urban poor and for rural poor. Let's just remind ourselves, and this is what I was suggesting was only 10,000 crores per annum, more than what the government is spending on PM Kisan. And yet we would have included tenant farmers, which are not included in PM Kisan, landless labor, rural other poor, and urban poor. So if we did that with the same, really roughly the same amount of money, you would be raising aggregate demand. The rich farmers are not going to spend that much more other than on tractors.
So let me at this point firstly say bye to Amitabh, who has to go. Thanks, Amitabh. I wanted Amit to add briefly his comment, and then I want Sunil to respond to everything he's heard. He's heard most of it. I know we've been losing him in the middle. Amit, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what Professor Mehrotra has said, obviously, but I also understand Mr. Madhavan's point as well in terms of the perspective of this government. It is certainly a growth-oriented perspective. We knew that going into the budget that they would take an infra-growth route to recovery. So it's not surprising. So, I certainly am not surprised, but I am disappointed for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, which is the distress is overwhelming. Survey after survey, and we've been doing a survey of surveys here at Azim Premji, shows us this, that people have suffered greatly. So and it's not even like you have to see a lot of this as dole or something like that, because you can spend in a way that does create infrastructure as well as demand. So the urban employment guarantee that Professor Mehrotra alluded to is one such thing. Narega, contrary to what a lot of people think, is not pure dole. It does create assets, and it can be used in a way to do that. So there are ways to spend which supports people who need support right now, while creating demand and creating public goods. I go back to what Professor Mehrotra said in terms of the tax GDP ratio. For me, what that really points to is the importance of public goods in growth and in prosperity. We are never going to become a prosperous country unless we take public goods seriously, and we really haven't done that. So and that takes money, obviously. So to whether increasing taxes is possible at a point like this, that's a debate that can be had, and there's a legitimate consideration that maybe you shouldn't touch taxes at all at a time like this. Okay, if that is the perspective, I would say still it would be worth spending more, allowing the debt GDP ratio to go up. You would have seen the report, the chapter in the economic survey that came out, which actually very sensibly argues that the debt GDP ratio should not be a big concern at this point. Growth is going to happen, and that doesn't require taxation.
I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but we have 10 minutes left. I want Sunil and then Aman, and then I want last comments. So Sunil, I think there's a lot of pushback against your idea that the rich are getting clobbered. I think we had a fascinating fascinating figure from the Oxfam head who just left, Amitabh, talking about how just taxing 11 billionaires by 1% could have made all the difference to our frontline workers. So just go ahead, Sunil.
Look, when you make a comparison, only 3% of India pays taxes. So don't make comparison with other countries on tax GDP ratio. The first should be to expand the base. Would rich agriculture, if I am earning 8 lakhs of rupees as an urban poor, I have to pay a tax. Why don't you give all the farmers, if you're earning 20 to 25 lakhs, you have to pay 5% tax. And all the poor farmers are excluded because 25 lakhs is a very large amount. Now, once they take that decision, then you'll have another lot of tractor rally, and you'll have everybody going around and saying, how can you tax the farmers? You tax rich farmers. You have to expand the base. Before you get into wealth tax, before you get into everything else, first you expand your base. Don't try and increase wealth tax straight away. That's the question that I'm going to ask. And I'm asking if I'm not very wealthy. That at all. I don't fall into that 11 billion. Even if you put in a wealth tax on me, you won't get much. But I'm just saying, look, you do not take the end which is easily available and keep on hitting them as much as you can. You have to learn to expand your tax base. Only 3% pay taxes in India. Come on, 1.5 billion people we have. So if you carry on saying, no, the 3% have to be taxed more, as it is, they are paying much more on petrol, all I'm saying is the middle income group, the 300 million people have been ignored. They feel that everything is going up and they have been left untouched. The poor, the government has taken care of. The urban lot, I'm not saying fully taken care of, but the whole of last year, they were getting a lot of reliefs, and even in this budget. But the middle income group, which has the capacity to spend, please give them some incentivization to spend. That's all I'm saying.
I'd actually agree with that. I'd actually agree with that. That I think the salaried class, the salaried middle class in India in particular, Madhavan, are you not you're agreeing with me or you're disagreeing with me? Let me just ask you.
I agree with you, except that I do not think the super rich should be clubbed with the middle class. Even a middle class, let's say an IT vice president who earns 50 lakhs a year should not be clubbed with a famously surnamed inheritor who's going to get $100 million in the bank without moving a finger. And that is what the Amitabh Behar argument was about. It was about inheritance of wealth and accumulation of wealth. It is not about creation of wealth. The other thing is we have a complicated setup in which limited liability companies help people like Vijay Mallya get away. We have the idea of the limited liability company in which you may not own the wealth, but you have it in the name of a company, and the company gets away with it, so you get away with it. So there's a lot of contemplation to be done. The third point I want to make on Sunil Alagh's point of view is that I'm afraid infrastructure is becoming so automated increasingly that I wish he's right. I fear he may be wrong that in the number of jobs being created by infrastructure spending, on which we need some more detailed analysis from economists on how much jobs infrastructure create. And last but not the least, I want to sneak in and talk about Swachh Bharat, because my fellow panelists spoke about interventions at the grassroots level. What better intervention can you do than marry Swachh Bharat with the pro-poor programs? That is not happening because 1,41,000 crore of Swachh Bharat 2.0 sounded very attractive till I found out it includes garbage management, plastic use, waste management. All together is over 5 years, which means we are spending a paltry sum. It's time for the economy to think in terms of green infrastructure initiatives to help the poor, because you're killing two stones with one, two birds with one.
I have 5 minutes left. I want very brief interjections from Aman and Bharat, and then Sunil to start wrapping this up for us. Aman, Agarwal, please, your very brief interjection. Go ahead.
Please understand, one side we are saying we want to reduce taxes around the world and including India, and we have been able to reduce in certain segments. And the other side, we are saying we now want to levy taxes again. This particular large community of the industries have actually contributed not only here, but outside also towards the time of COVID, and has been able to provide funds in terms of trying to fight COVID within the organization and even outside. Now, what is the message you want to give, that they should leave India and go and settle somewhere in Mauritius or in China or some other part, which can give them that safe haven of respecting them, of creating value to the system? What is that what we want to do? I think that is something which needs to be understood. And I remember Mr. Malhotra was there in one of the channels with me, and I did ask him, I think it was Faye's program, I did ask him as to how much can you actually, even if all the money we have, $600 billion as foreign reserve, is to be given away in terms of giving away to people at large, how many months can we give away that money to people at large? I think it's important to understand that we need to have a framework which makes people empowered and makes things workable. And everyone is clear on the fact that the budget this time had to focus on vaccination, getting the economy rolls on back, people on the roads like the vehicle. And that is what is important, and which she focused in the first point, in the opening point of the well-being, which is the focus area. And I think taxation have already been reduced extensively for individuals and others as well. It's a question of now utilizing some of those facilities and expanding that base, which Alagh also spoke about.
Sure. Bharat, Ramaswamy, quickly, and then Sunil, and then we start wrapping up. Bharat, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to say the idea of a middle class India is a bit of a distraction. It takes only about 3.5 lakhs of annual income for a family of 2 working adults to get into the top 10% of India's income distribution. So the 90% of India's income India's population is below that level. So I think we should keep this focus squarely on the bottom 90%. The middle class in India, in terms of proportion, is very, very small in India. And so I think the second point I want to make is that this government or any other government has to think about what is its strategy for growth, even if it's not concerned about income distribution. But inclusive development becomes important for growth because this 90% that you have, they're spending close to 65% of their income just on food and energy. So the market for domestic goods is very, very small. So either the government has to have a very driven strategy for exports, or it has to develop the domestic market.
Okay. While Sunil rejoins us, I've been running a little experiment since the morning. We've been asking people to use one word that they think most aptly sums up this budget. And I'll start with you, Aman. One word. Remember, it has to be one word.
It is a social well-being, and basically it's the well-being which is being looked after, both in terms of employment, growth, and the health.
All right. Amit, what is your one word for this budget?
Disappointing.
Disappointing. Bharat, what would be your one word?
Not damaging.
Not damaging. Madhavan?
Muscular.
Muscular. Very interesting variety of views. Sunil, your one word?
Yeah. My word is growth budget, because it's very easy. I was on the board of IIM Bangalore. I just want to contradict somebody who says that one kid gets 1 crore a year, and the whole of IIM is treated as if you get into IIM, you'll get 1 crore. You know what the average is? Only 24 lakhs. It's 2 lakhs a month. So please don't talk about one senior vice president getting 50 lakhs and assuming that all the rich in India are getting that amount. Very easy to say, very easy to draw politically, but very wrong in fact.
And Sunil, do you believe the budget had a growth strategy? That's something we didn't speak about, right?
It had a growth strategy, and the budget is only for 1 year. And they are introducing every 3 months and 6 months some new elements come in. Don't think this is a 5-year plan. It's a 1-year budget. They've got 9.5% fiscal deficit. They want to...
We just lost you at the tail end. Sunil?
Censorship.
No censorship at all.
I mean, everybody's got... I'm getting it back because a lot of people are calling me on other channels. All I'm saying is that, look, this is a growth budget. It's only for 1 year. And they keep changing every 3 months and 6 months. They keep adding to it. Don't think it's a 5-year plan. Don't assume that this is the way India is going to go. Next year, they'll have another budget. Say what you have. Have constructive criticism all round. I respect that.
We leave it there. Madhavan started this program by saying everybody would agree on this budget. I think we demonstrated that Indians can disagree on almost everything. We will leave it there. Sunil, Alagh, Bharat, Ramaswami, Aman, Agarwal, Amit, and Madhavan. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
For saying bye to all of you one by one. Bye. We are continuing our special programming as we look at this budget, the budget of 2021. Let me say bye to everybody one by one. Bye, Madhavan. Catch you later on another show.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.